This is a video that I've been meaning to make for a while, and why I haven't yet... I don't know, I guess it just felt embarrassing, or maybe nobody would believe me because it actually sounds pretty ridiculous. But I've had this on my mind for so long, and I've thought about it so much, that I've practically got most of the script mapped out in my head anyway. So here it is, the story of my ungodly, annoying co-worker, known simply as Carlos. So as usual, you can tab out and do something else while I talk, or you can watch me kill things in Kingdoms of Amalur. Trust me, you'll find out why I picked this game soon. Okay, now, on to the story. Last year, I quit my job. There were two reasons for this. The first one being that I just felt like I didn't need to be there anymore. And overall, I just felt like it was time for me to move on. Then there's the other reason, and this is the big one here. It was because of Carlos. And why I never told anybody about him until near the very end, I don't know. I don't know if I'm alone on this, but the worlds at home and at work feel very different. I think part of the reason was because when I got home, I'd just be feeling very tired, and all I wanted to do was just rest on my bed for a little bit. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the job itself and how it was for me there. I used to work at an Italian restaurant called The Cotto. Perhaps you've even heard of it. It's an Italian restaurant on K Road that serves really good food. Expensive, but good. So if you do have the money to spend, and also when we're not in lockdown, I recommend going there for dinner. Anyway, my job there was as a dishwasher. It was my job to clean the dishes in this big sink and then put them through this big industrial dishwasher that was next to the sink. It wasn't anything glamorous, but the pay was good enough to be worth it, and besides, I actually did have friends there who I got along with pretty well. That may have been part of the reason why I never told anybody about Carlos outside of work, because I did have my friends there to balance out the monotony of my job. That was except for him. Now let's talk about Carlos and why he was so fucking annoying. And also, heads up, I'm going to be using the word annoying a lot. First, let me tell you a little bit about him. He was this kind of short man with orangey skin, he had jet black hair and this closely shaven beard. He was also a ladies' man. I remember seeing him at one point cuddling up with his girlfriend. I can't remember if she worked there as well, or if he just invited her there sometimes. I'm telling you this because everything he did afterwards was really confusing. Here's what the main thing he'd do is, he would annoy you by taking something you'd say and twisting it out of context into a bad sex joke. I'm not even making that up. You could be talking to him about the most trivial thing ever, like what movie you saw recently, what you did last night, what you had for dinner, and he would somehow take it and turn it into a bad sex joke. And he was deliberately doing this at the expense of others. I'll get to that later. This was bad for me because I'm somebody who likes talking to people. It's actually something I'm quite proud of. I'm on the autism spectrum disorder, yet I can have a perfectly normal conversation with people. This also unfortunately means that I can't help but be polite in conversations. So it was often quite easy for him to bait me into talking with him, only to have him spring one of his irritating traps on me. It was infuriating whenever he'd do it. It was like getting jabbed in the side of your belly by a sharp object. Quick, painful, and annoying. And why I kept on falling into his traps, I don't know. I guess it's just a force of habit for me, or maybe I kept thinking that he wouldn't be that bad, but then he actually would be that bad. I can't help it, I like having a good chat whenever I get the opportunity. I can't remember everything he did, but I can remember a few examples. Like, I remember one time I walked into the car to begin my shift, and I was feeling tired because I hadn't slept very well. But when I said that, he just said, well, maybe that's because you're spending too much time on the hub. And I just stood there stuttering, whoa, what? as he went back around to the front kitchen. It took me a second to realize he was talking about Pornhub. I also remember one time telling him about an RPG video game I've been playing around the time, and I can't remember exactly what he did, but I do know he somehow managed to twist it into sexual role-playing. I'm not even kidding. And he was doing this constantly. At that point I was wondering, who the hell is this guy? Who has sex on the brain this fucking much? Pun not intended. Actually no, a little intended. It also wasn't a secret either. Everybody at the Cotto knew that Carlos was like this. And apparently I wasn't the only one who he'd done this to either. In fact, I'd often hear my boss, his name was John by the way, often criticize Carlos by saying, "You're fucked, you know that?" And even at one point I remember him saying, "Don't talk to Carlos." Oh, how I wish I'd taken that advice more to heart. But you wanna know what the really weird thing is? This actually isn't the only time I've met somebody like this. I remember years and years ago, I attended a film school, the New Zealand Film Academy to be specific, and I remember there was somebody like this as well. I remember his name was Roxme, or Rox for short, and I remember he was also quite intrusive and would also make annoying sexual references, which would also come at my expense. I don't know if I was the only person who he did this to, but I remember it would get on my nerves big time. So when I figured out that Carlos was pretty much that kind of person, I was thinking, oh no, he's not like that guy who I knew at the academy, is he? Oh, how little I knew. He's actually worse. And it all started with the day I got properly introduced to him. I remember in the early days when I was still getting used to my job and I was learning how to properly clean off the dishes using the hose. And I remember Carlos was told to give me some advice on how to do it. And he did, but before he started he actually said, "Okay, so the way you handle this is how you handle a woman." And I was just standing there thinking, What are you talking about? And that pretty much sets the tone for the rest of the story. Half of everything he said had something to do with sex or woman. And this was in addition to his condescending jokes. It actually got to the point where I asked him, "Are you being serious right now?" And he would just say, "Yes, I am being serious." "No, you're not. You're trolling me." "I'm not trolling you." "Yes, you are. You're taking something that I'm saying and replacing it with a bad joke. That's trolling." I don't think that was exactly what I said, but that was the gist of it. And he was trolling. He would set up something and then deliver something completely different as a means to annoy you. That's trolling. Real life trolling, I guess you could call it. But he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't take the fucking hint. Even though I clearly hated him, he kept on going. And for as insane as that sounds, that was just the start. He would also find other ways to get under your skin, like saying these weird, out of nowhere, out of place things. Like I remember there was this one time where he was climbing up to get some stuff off the shelves above the sink I was working at, and then, from out of nowhere, he bent down and said right at me, "Sweetheart." And I was just thinking, what? Huh? Why did he say that? Why the fuck did he say that? Oh, hold on for a second. And now you know why I chose this game. And it didn't end there. He would also figure out other weird ways of getting underneath my skin. I also remember one other time I was eating some food in the Cotto during a break. When I wasn't working as a dishwasher, I was actually having lunch at a sushi restaurant that was right next to the Cotto. And I remember one time I thought I might try something new by actually bringing my food into the Cotto, eating off one of the restaurant's plates, and then I could just wash the plate off later. I was a dishwasher after all. But when Carlos saw me, he made a big deal out of it. He was just like, "Whoa, Jimmy, what are you eating there?" It was just food. I think that's what I said. I can't properly remember. And that wasn't the only time either. There'd be times when he praised me on the tiniest, most insignificant little things. And it was so damn annoying for a number of reasons. Let me tell you something about myself. I actually follow a number of mental health channels on my YouTube account. And, oh, hold on a sec. Ooh, that's satisfying. Anyway, yes, I actually follow a few mental health and psychology channels on my accounts. You know, like Casey Morton and Psych2Go being two of them. Ever since my depression phase, I've actually had a big interest in psychology and mental health. And one thing I've learned from those channels is that there does exist such a thing as toxic positivity. It's when you're trying to cheer somebody up by telling them it's okay or it's alright, even if the situation they're going through is objectively bad. It's toxic because you're invalidating the pain they're going through. But Carlos was going beyond that. He knew that what he was saying and doing was getting underneath my skin. So I don't know if I'm inventing a new phrase here, but this is something that I'm going to call anti-positivity. Where you say a positive word or phrase with the express intent of upsetting somebody, i.e. angering or annoying them. Which leads me to the next horribly irritating thing he'd do to me. He would praise me on my burps. I'm not even kidding. Anybody who's known me for a long time knows that I actually have a burping problem. And it's annoying for me because it makes talking to people awkward. It can interrupt me mid-sentence as I'm talking to somebody, and at times it can even break out into burping fits. It's not very pleasant. At all. But did Carlos care? No. Whenever I burped within his hearing range, he would just be like, "Oh, beautiful!" And in case you're wondering, yes, I did try speaking back to him. I would try telling him, "Would you please stop that? I don't like doing it." And then he would just say, "Then why do you do it?" I'm not doing this on purpose. And he was relentless about it. He literally took every single fucking opportunity to praise me on my belches, even though he knew it was making me angry. In fact, I even remember there was this one time where I gone back to the condo after taking a quick little lunch break, and as I was walking past the front counter and into the back, I burped. But it must have been the tiniest, most barely audible little gasp of air that escaped from between my lips. Somehow, he heard it and yelled, "Oh, beautiful!" Yeah, in that raised voice tone. Excuse me for just one little moment. Seriously, who the hell does that? Who the hell wakes up in the morning and says, "You know what I'm gonna do today? I'm gonna train myself to listen to people burping from a mile away." And all of this kept going along with the bad sex jokes and the anti-positivity. And then finally, all of it reached a boiling point for me one day when he said, "If there's one thing I know about you, Jimmy, is that you love a good belch." And again I told him, "No, I don't." And then again he said, "Then why do you do it?" And then that was when I finally decided to confront him about, "Okay, seriously, dude, do you hate me or something?" And he was just like, no. "Then why do you keep annoying the crap out of me?" And I think he said something like, "Because you're my mate." Yeah, that was a weird thing he'd do to me. He'd still say that I was his friend even though I clearly hated him. And I just said, "No, I'm not. I don't like you. I think you're annoying." There was a brief pause, and then he said, "Well, that's a shame, Jimmy, because I like you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I just outright told him that I didn't like him, and he was treating it like it was nothing. And this was another reason why arguing with him was so frustrating. Whenever you try to criticize him on his bad behavior, he'd either shrug it off like it was nothing, or he'd respond with an evasive question or answer that was completely off topic. And when he told me that he still liked me even though he was deliberately making me angry at him, and when I figured all of that stuff out about him, I realized at that moment I pretty much had no defense against this guy. I couldn't call him out on his bad behavior because of how tone deaf he seemed to be, nor could I defend myself because of how nonchalant he was. This man had somehow mastered the infallible art of being an annoying cunt. And believe it or not, that's not the thing that made me completely hate him. Swinging back to his bad sex jokes, there was this one time when I was working at the sink cleaning the dishes when he came around. And I don't know, somehow he just got me talking to him. I guess I thought I could get around him twisting my sentences out of context. Or maybe I thought it wasn't going to be that bad. I started talking to him about how tired I'd been feeling at the job. You know, like the fatigue was setting in, it was beginning to feel monotonous, and overall I was just beginning to feel worn out. Oh, have you been getting a lot of sex without telling me? I felt a dagger jab into my gut, and I felt that dagger twist. This was unbelievable. I couldn't even have a heart-to-heart with this guy without him poisoning the well. From then on, I was more cautious around him than ever, and it made working at the Costco more unpleasant than it needed to be. And this job, while not really that hard, was still tiring for me because it was physical work. I was working there for about 3 to 4 hours a day, and this was along with this annoying pervert that was sometimes there. And then it actually stopped. What I think happened is that his shift got moved to another time and was no longer a part of mine. And then the following year, the pandemic started. Then made its way into New Zealand, the first lockdown started, and we were all stuck at home, doing nothing but allowing our anxiety to rise. And then months later, the lockdown ended and we all got our jobs back. Except, for some reason, I only got about 2 days of my job back instead of 5 like how it was before. And this time it was actually kind of boring now. One of my friends moved to Wellington and another of mine had his shift moved over to a different time and wasn't part of mine anymore. So for a while, my shifts were actually very quiet. On the best days, I'd just do the work and then I'd leave. It was actually very uneventful. But then, I'd start seeing Carlos again. His shift had been moved to coincide halfway through mine, and then this whole thing started all over again. Except this time, it was even worse because I didn't have my friends there to balance it out with having good, fun conversations. And also, like last time, he took every single little opportunity. Including this one particularly insensitive joke he pulled, where I told him I was looking for a birthday present for my mother since her birthday was coming up, and he recommended peaches and cream. You know, the sex shop. That's my mum, you dick. So as time was going on with him hovering over me again, I was starting to feel increasingly unhappy there. But did Carlos care? No. He once asked me how I was doing, and I just said, fine. And I swear to God, it must have been the most blatantly depressed sounding fine ever. And he just said, yes, good, positivity. He actually didn't care about how I was feeling. So that's how it was for a time. I come in, do the work, and sometimes have to endure his bad jokes. But then, I did something that I finally should have done ages ago. I started to completely and totally ignore him. The reason why I didn't do this before is because I tried and failed. The last time I tried, I started laughing. I guess the idea of dicking with him like that was funny to me. But now I wasn't feeling so joyful. So for a whole shift, I completely ignored him. And he noticed. Throughout the day, he was trying to get my attention, but I didn't even give him a glance. I pretended like he didn't exist. And he still couldn't comprehend why, even after John outright told him that I hated him. And like a narcissist who couldn't take constructive criticism, he tried to defend himself by saying that I hated John. Oh yeah, well, Jimmy hates John. That's what he says behind your back. Fuck John. Which of course I didn't. I thought John was a good boss. So throughout the rest of the day, he was trying to get a reaction out of me, but I completely ignored him. I just told myself that I didn't care about a single thing he had to say. And it almost completely worked. But then, what does that prick do? He shouts my name at me so loudly it gives me a fright. But I didn't let him win. I continued to ignore him right up until the end of the shift. So that worked, but then I started to think of something. This is what I had to do now for the best possible version of my shift. I actually now had to use this extreme measure just to get the best possible version of the day. And on top of that, I was also starting to notice some other things, like how I was beginning to feel like I wasn't really needed there anymore. I wasn't earning a whole lot of money there anymore, and quite frankly, you could have replaced me with somebody else who probably needed the job more than I did. So I was already on the verge of quitting while I was still continuing to ignore Carlos. But then I did something that to this day I completely regret doing. I was still trying to figure out why is he like this? And while I was ignoring him, in the silence, I had this moment of clarity. The only reason I could think of for why he was doing this was because he liked being hated. So when I got the opportunity, I confronted him about it by saying, I think I figured it out. You just like being hated, don't you? And he just flat out said, well yeah, of course I do, I'm submissive. Yep, you heard that right. He was actually doing this because he was getting off on it.
That is deeply upsetting.
And I can't even tell you if he was being honest or if he was just continuing to dick with me. Regardless, that was the breaking point. About 2 weeks later, I quit my job. I didn't even tell him I was leaving, I ended it anticlimactically. I thought about telling him, but somehow I just knew he'd make a big deal out of it. So, there's the story of how I was essentially bullied by an annoying asshole who wasn't taking sex seriously enough. And believe it or not, I'm actually somebody who, up until this point, has always thought that we take sex too seriously. You know, like, come on, it's sex. It's a perfectly normal part of being human. But after the hell that I've been through, I might actually have to rethink that. And I also have to ask, has anybody here met somebody else who's like this? Because like I said earlier, this isn't the only time I've met somebody who's like this. I remember knowing somebody else who was like this in school as well. Yeah, it was back at intermediate school. There was somebody who would swear a lot, even though he must have been like 12 or 11 at the time. He was pretty over the top, and I think he also made bad sex jokes. And then of course there was Roxmy, who I mentioned earlier from the film course. I feel like I have to know now, is this like a thing with New Zealand? Like, is there at least one Carlos in every single workplace? Or am I just so unlucky that I keep running into this sort of person?